Hey y'all, Scott here, and welcome to a new segment I like to refer to as Tales from the Backlog. Man, what a scary intro. I could shit myself all day to that thing. Tales from the Backlog is going to cover me going through games that have sat on my shelf for eons and having me finally take a look at them. So let's go ahead and pick a game at random. Gravity Rush. This is the remastered version. It was originally released on the PlayStation Vita in 2012 and made its way to the PS4 in early 2016. Gravity Rush was the brainchild of Keiichiro Toyama, who directed the first Silent Hill. It was originally being developed for the PS3 before being shifted over to the Vita and finally getting a remaster on the PS4. The game follows Kat, who alongside a cat named Dusty can shift gravity for a short period of time. Kat wakes up with amnesia and decides to help people out with her gravity shifting abilities. And from here, the plot goes all over the place. You bring parts of the city back to where they belong, you meet another gravity shifter Raven who thinks you're a no-good doer, you discover a lost city of children, you have a psychedelic deep dream-like sequence about who exactly you are and how you'll die. Character-wise, I wasn't really into any of the characters except for Kat. She's adorable, especially this profile shot of her, look at that. Kat's really smart and capable, but she can be super bubbly sometimes, and it made me really like her as a protagonist. All the other characters I wasn't into at all. A lot of the townspeople were just mean-spirited or dumb or annoying, and other characters like the children in the Lost City held me captive, and when told to save them, I was just like, why would I ever want to do that? I never really considered Gravity Rush to have an amazing plot. It works for the game, like I was never really confused while playing. It's just hard to explain to people afterwards, but if you play the game, the plot makes sense in context to the world and the gameplay. However, the plot doesn't really have a coherent beginning, middle, and end. Like, those three sections don't really feel naturally intertwined, they feel very separate. This is probably because the game is structured by episodes, which makes the whole game's plot feel like it's a season of a television show or something that has a handful of stories that kinda come together in the end. It's not often sensical, but very rarely did I ever say what during the game. Except at the end of episode 9, I had to rewatch this cutscene like 4 times to even kind of understand what went on. So Kat's doing laundry just in a towel, and Sid, a police officer she befriended, comes by to show her the newspaper commending her for helping the city out. Sid then comments that she's only in a towel, and Kat gets defensive like he's coming onto her, and then she's naked. I guess her towel falls off because she's motioning him to get away from her, but with the comic book style, it's kinda hard to follow and understand. Speaking of which, oh my to this game's art style, it's so cool! The moment it clicked with me was when I noticed how the game handles distance structures. Buildings in the distance are just outlines with a primary color filling them in, and that just looks straight out of a painting or a comic book. I think that looks so cool. The majority of cutscenes in Gravity Rush are in a comic book style, which at first I was turned off by. It kinda reminded me of Bayonetta 2, where some of the cutscenes were fully animated and others were just still images kind of moving. Obviously done as a cost-cutting or time-saving measure, but as the art style started to feel more and more like a comic book come to life, I think they worked out pretty well. They can be sometimes hard to follow, like in the end of episode 9, but they were alright. And I gotta say, this game feels really Nintendo-esque. Some of that's probably because the characters speak gibberish, which was kinda surprising to me. This just seemed like the kind of game that would have full voice acting, but I guess not. It's alright, I just feel like full voice acting wouldn't feel out of place in the game at all, and I would have actually preferred it. Getting to the meat of it all, Gravity Rush obviously focuses heavily on the use of gravity shifting for its gameplay. Pressing R1 lifts you up and allows you to control your gravity based on where you want to land. So if you aim at a wall and hit R1, you'll propel to the wall and will be able to walk on it. The game also utilizes the motion controls of the DualShock 4 and allows for precision aiming. I always love controls like this, where using motion enhances your control tenfold. You do have a limited amount of time to shift gravity, which forces you to be precise and creative with carrying out specific tasks. You may think gravity shifting would get disorienting, but most of the time it's alright. It is really annoying, however, when you're in a frantic fight or race and you end up in a place you have no idea where it is in context to where you were. It can get kinda confusing sometimes, but it works well overall. You see, with a mechanic like this, I thought the game would be focused on exploration and puzzle solving. Nope, combat! The main thing done in Gravity Rush is combat and flying around. And this is where my problems with the game rev up. The majority of missions in this game revolve around using gravity to defeat the enemies, the Nevi. You really only have one main attack in the game, being the gravity kick. Basically, it's like propelling yourself forward with R1, but it's an attack, and this can be incredibly fun. When you land an attack, it makes you feel triumphant. The problem is, this is the only practical attack. The other ones we have here are a standard attack, which doesn't involve gravity shifting, and it does not accomplish anything. It can only really damage the most basic of enemies, and even then, it takes way too long to take them down this way. And we have a few special attacks, but they need to charge up over time, so the gravity kick is the main attack you will be doing. And let me tell you, this thing can be kind of frustrating. Multiple times, it'll simply miss the target or just not hit it at all. Or fly by the target, missing it by that much, and it is so frustrating, and this is emphasized by the tedious amounts of enemy waves and bosses you have to fight through. This is actually my main problem with the game. There are so many times where you have to fight through a large wave of Nevi, and then guess what you have to do next? Do it again! And then I realize I haven't leveled up in the game at all. Yeah, I totally forgot about the fact that you can level up your powers and health through the menu, and I figured it out about a solid 80% through the game. No idea how I lived through the majority of it, but it was frustrating, so please, folks, remember to level yourself up early on. This section was the worst to live through without leveling up. It just became unfair, even with leveling up, like half the time. Immediately when I'd respawn, the swordfish Nevi would attack me, and like, what was I supposed to do there? He literally came up to me from behind, I couldn't see him! And then when I would die, it would start me back at the section where I have to travel back up to the wave of enemies. This made me realize I peaked right before I put this game in. Anyways, to level up you have to collect as many gems as you can. You can either find these scattered across the game or earn them by completing missions. I wasn't super into the missions. They were basically just more combat or more flying around the city, and due to them not really progressing the game forward or offering unique ideas outside of the main story, I only played through a few of them until I got what I considered to be enough gems. Alright, putting aside my frustrations relating to my stupidity about forgetting to level up on my first playthrough, my main problems with Gravity Rush is that the shallow combat is its main focus, and how tedious the game can be sometimes. Like I said, I would have liked a bit more variety with the use of gravity shifting. It's mainly used as a means to fight enemies and get to places. There are a few sections, like the sequence where the pyramid-shaped gravity shifters shift your gravity to wherever they point, that I really enjoyed. I wanted a bit more of this stuff, just on a grander scale. Basing the game around combat is fine, I just would have wanted it to be a bit more deep or interesting, while also having more variety in what you're doing. So much of the game was just defeating a wave of enemies, and then when they were all gone, you had to defeat another wave of enemies. It just got annoying. Overall, Gravity Rush is good, it just has a few flaws that I really want ironed out. It could be tedious and frustrating sometimes, but I was constantly charmed and endeared by the game, and I wanted to see it through to the end. I could see the passion that went into this game, and I want to see this universe expanded upon with more games in the future. And hey, we already have one in the form of Gravity Rush 2, so I can't wait to see how they improved and expanded upon the original with that game. So yeah, I liked Gravity Rush, and with a few tweaks here and there, it definitely had the potential to be one of my favorites. So here's hoping Gravity Rush 2 hits it out of the park. But I have to say, I bought Gravity Rush Remastered for a solid $20 on Amazon, and it's definitely worth that price. I wonder if it's still that cheap. Hey all, Scott here, and welcome to another installment of Tales from the Backlog. A while back I stated my intentions on playing through the large backlog of Zelda games I've never played. But now that I beat Breath of the Wild, who knows, maybe I can beat all the Zelda games and make some killer and overhyped Scott the Woz episodes about them. You may have thought I forgot, well the joke's on you. To help me remember, I've kept this string tied to my finger for the past 7 months. I've seen what hell looks like. The Legend of Zelda, one of the most beloved gaming franchises of all time. Maintaining such a high level of quality and inspiring new generations with every new entry in the series, it truly gives me pride to say I've never gotten into the series fully. I've discussed this before, I have a hefty amount of respect for the Zelda series and every single organ of the people who helped craft it. It's just, they're always hard to fully get into from beginning to end for me. These are games you can't put down and pick back up a month later. God no, God no, God no, you really have to sit down and devote some serious time towards playing these games. I'd always start them, get busy with something, go away for a week or two, come back and be completely lost. I did beat Breath of the Wild and had an absolute blast with that, but it's pretty different from the other entries in the franchise. I definitely have to beat some of the more run-of-the-mill games in the series to prove my worth at all. So instead of going back 1 game, or 2 games, or 5 games, let's start at the very beginning, The Legend of Zelda on the Nintendo Entertainment System. Similar to Super Mario Bros. With platformers, The Legend of Zelda didn't invent the adventure game, but innovated and popularized the effing heck out of the genre. The game was developed simultaneously with Mario, but was basically thought of as the exact opposite of what Mario was turning out to be. While Super Mario Bros. Was a linear action game, Zelda was a non-linear adventure. The game's sense of discovery was inspired by game director Shigeru Miyamoto's experiences exploring the woods as a child. He wanted to give players a large world to explore with various wonders and secrets hidden around every corner. This mentality behind a Zelda game has been somewhat absent in the series until recently with the release of Breath of the Wild. A major focus of that game was to bring back the sense of adventurous discovery that the original Legend of Zelda held so dear. Many, including myself, would agree that it succeeded. But let's get on with finally conquering the NES original, released in 1986 for the Famicom Disk System in Japan and making its way west in 1987. The story here is nothing elaborate, just a way to bring incentive to go Green Boy in Forest Go. The Triforce is a few solid triangles with mystical powers. Ganon stole the Triforce of Power and needed the only other piece, the Triforce of Wisdom, to rule the world. Princess Zelda split the Triforce of Wisdom into 8 pieces to stop Ganon from stealing it as easily, so Ganon decided to steal her easily instead. So you, Link, or whatever you fancy naming him, have to embark on an epic quest to not only cop the 8 pieces of the Triforce of Wisdom, but also defeat Ganon, take back the Triforce of Power, and save Princess Zelda. Yeah, the Triforce only comes in sets of 2 in this game. Later games introduce the Triforce of Courage, which is associated with Link, but here, I mean, you gotta take their word for it that the term tri equates to only 2 pieces. Waiting on the title screen triggers a short synopsis of the story, and I gotta say, these writers really know how to sell me on the concept of rescuing Zelda. The screen then scrolls through all the different treasures hidden throughout the game and ends with a poignant, "Please look up the manual for details." Well, la-dee-da, you don't have to tell me twice, I will take that as a solid excuse to cheat. The manual only details a guide on how to get to the first dungeon, but does lend a hand in the form of some helpful hints pertaining to what items do and what certain enemies are like. But come on, if we're gonna cheat by looking at the manual, we might as well go even knee deeper in the whole sinning thing and just use a full guide. Some purists may scoff at this, but I feel that The Legend of Zelda has always been a game where outside material is required to fully enjoy the experience. The game itself barely does anything to tell you what to do, and it almost feels like it's absolutely screaming at you to not touch that dial because a 12-month Nintendo Power subscription is in your future. You're thrown in here with nothing but a gaping hole begging to be walked into, which rewards you with a solid wooden sword. The rest of the game is a fucking riddle. The structure of Zelda is basically you have to wander around the overworld until you find a dungeon, enter the dungeon, beat the boss, get the Triforce piece, and move on. Pretty simple, but navigating the overworld is pretty difficult without a detailed map handy. There are some memorable screens, but the majority of the time each screen blends in with the last. There aren't a ton of crazy memorable set pieces or different looking areas to traverse. There's a graveyard, and that's about it. This is made even more difficult with the in-game map, which I have no idea what you can discern from this. The only possible thing I can think of is the fact that a guide can just tell you go to the upper right hand corner, but good god man, this is tart. Speaking of the visuals, this game reeks of early NES. It definitely feels more than a launch NES black box game, less than something like Super Mario Bros. 3. Also, the perspective of Zelda is top down, so I always found these screens really odd. Am I only one that gets way past dizzy trying to figure out what this is supposed to be if it's top down? The soundtrack is classic. You're almost exclusively going to be hearing the overworld theme and the dungeon theme, but they're such solid tracks I didn't mind that there wasn't much more music in the game. The journey can be made a bit easier by making sure you upgrade Link's abilities throughout the game. You can pick up heart containers to increase max health, find up to 2 better swords, the magical shield, the blue and red rings which decrease damage taken by enemies. All these can be yours by completely guessing without a guide. Most of these abilities and secrets in the game can be found by solving puzzles. Zelda is famous for its world-renowned homemade puzzles, but in this game, they don't really feel like puzzles. Just do this for this to happen. Stuff like, push this completely ordinary block after defeating all enemies to be able to proceed. There's really no context clues most of the time to tell you what you should do, but sometimes the game will give you a hint and they just end up basically being worthless and cryptic. Speaking of which, oh Jesus, do I have an exclamation for you, because Jesus Christ, can this game be cryptic? This is why I don't feel guilty using a guide on this game, because almost everything the game tells you is worthless, and almost nothing can be taken from them. Most secrets are bombable walls that look just like every other wall in the game. Now, of course, in other games we have nice clues, but in this game, God, haven't we all been there at some point, just rubbing against a wall for some rupees? This game is truly for the anti-Mormon in all of us. If I was playing without a guide, how would I know this is the wall to bomb compared to every other wall that looks like it? How would I know this is the bush to burn? A lot of these secrets aren't super mandatory, but some are, and if you want to even think about upgrading your power, you're gonna have to slaughter countless enemies for rupees to buy the upgrades within shops you have to bomb random walls to gain access to. What a game! The dungeons are way better than the overworld though in terms of traversal and secrets. These are much more clear-cut what you're supposed to do, as there's only so many paths to take, and basically the secrets are limited to either bomb the wall or push the block. As you move along, however, the end dungeon bosses become more and more specific in terms of their weaknesses. You have to place bombs in the Dodongo's path for him to eat it, but you only have so many chances until you run out of bombs. Fucked. That's me, alright. You can go back and grind for bombs by constantly killing enemies, but moments like, fucked, that's me, alright, are aplenty in this game. I died like a ton in Zelda, but it never felt overly difficult. It felt alright. Until we get to the 5th dungeon here. These are dark nuts, red and blue variety. They can only be killed by getting attacked in the back or the side, but they literally move around all the time, and Dungeon 5 has 2 main sections filled to the brim with these honkin' things, and I kept on dying, and this was the section that gave me a little thing I refer to as an ulcer. Everything after this just melts together, man. This was just headache-inducing. Do I recommend beating Zelda? No. The Legend of Zelda is a classic, but I think it's better suited as a relic from the past and the start of a legend rather than a game that can transcend generations. It captured the hearts and minds of millions when it was first released, but nowadays, it really needs to think about what it's done. This is a game meant to be played for eons, to last you for a long time, to feel like a true adventure. Definitely a game made for the kid in the 80s with a whole summer in front of him. Nowadays, it's best played with a guide. Now, you may think that would take out a lot of the fun, and I did too, honestly, but I had a large vat of fun with the game's first half. It ended up feeling even more like an adventure, almost as if I was following a treasure map. Basically making me count the amount of screens I had to pass to get to a point of interest made it feel like I was counting paces to X marks the spot. The last half of the game can go laid down. It cranks the difficulty up to the point where it's just not fun, and the stiffness of the controls are truly put to the limit of my patience. Now, playing the game without a guide in general, no thanks. Without a guide, this game is nothing. If you really want to see where Zelda began, look up a walkthrough and you got yourself a decent little afternoon. Any other method of playing the game reeks. You can still squeeze a fair amount of fun out of Zelda, but it's bogged down by loads of gameplay elements that just don't hold up nowadays. Mainly how cryptic the game can be with mandatory gameplay sections. The only gaming-related topic that makes even less sense is why my copy of Fling Smash is always soaked whenever I take it off the shelf. I don't know why. Hey y'all, Scott here, and welcome back to another installment of Destroying My Credibility. This is Tales from the Backlog. Yes, my favorite method of showing everybody what games I haven't played up until now. I pulled 2 things off of my shelf to pick from, so let's see what comes off of the backlog first. Yes, we return to the fabled backlog, games I own but just have been refusing to play for the longest time. I personally consider something to officially be in the backlog if I've owned it for a full month and haven't played it yet. Out of all the games in there, I have calculated the game that has spent the longest time in the backlog is Max Payne 3, so I decided to start playing Resident Evil 4. This is probably the game I own the most variations of that I haven't played, but why is that? Resident Evil 4 was always a game I wanted to play, but I was never eager to based on that fat little word under genre. I don't dislike horror in media, but it's just not my go-to genre of choice. It's just not something I need an overwhelming amount of in my life. I beat rock and roll adventures, I'd rather not be horrified right now. However, I've always been interested in this game because Resi 4 has always been lauded as not only one of the best games on the GameCube, PlayStation 2, Wii, Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, or Nintendo Switch, but also as a critically acclaimed turning point in the Resident Evil franchise. It's a series of games that just rots in my backlog, so I might take a look at a few more of these things depending on how my time with 4 goes. I finally decided to start playing this one a few months back, after I talked about my games of the year from 2001 all the way to 2018 and made it clear how I haven't played this, or these. I got a lot of flack from people for not playing some of the best games ever made, so I said, well, f you, I'll show them, I'll play Resident Evil 4. But it's finally time to finish it off, fully form an opinion on this thing, and wipe it from the backlog for eternity. Resident Evil used to be all about survival horror at all different kinds of camera angles, but after the first 3 entries and numerous side games, many of the developers knew something had to change with the series. It was getting kinda still not only for players, but for developers as well. 4 was in development for quite a long time, with multiple iterations of the game being started and then scrapped. The first version of Resi 4 created was such a departure from the series that they felt it wasn't right for it to carry the Resident Evil name, so instead of canceling it, they just reworked it into its own thing, which became Devil May Cry. The next couple of iterations were far closer to the Resident Evil 4 we know today, but featured different styles of gameplay, environments, and stories. Each version faced development problems, and by the time they started work on the final iteration, instead of focusing on how scary the game could be, they more so focused on how fun it could be. Couple that with the third-person perspective and more action-oriented gameplay, and we have ourselves a Resident Evil 4. Yeah, this was fairly different from the standard RE formula up to this point, but it still felt like a Resident Evil game. It had returning characters, and the horror element was still there. It seems every 3 of the numbered games in the mainline series, they change up the gameplay style, with 1 through 3 having fixed camera angles and focusing more so on survival horror. 4 through 6 being third person and being more action oriented, and 7 being first person and going back to pure survival horror. 4 was originally released only on the GameCube, one of the 5 games Capcom was touting as exclusives for the console, with 1 being cancelled, 1 released for the PlayStation 2 on release, 2 being released for the PlayStation 2 shortly after, and then 1 that remained a GameCube exclusive. Let's hear it for Capcom. You're trying to tell me this purple triangle is a lie? I mean, it's better this way for Resident Evil 4. This might just be one of the most accessible GameCube era games out there. You can play this thing on damn near anything, yes, even the Zeebo system from Brazil. Huh. But the question is, which version should be the one I cut my teeth on? Well, I've been talking about Nintendo-related stuff a little too much lately. It's obviously the company I dig the most, but I still love talking games for the platforms from all the other guys. So while Resident Evil 4 was originally a Nintendo exclusive, we should probably throw some variety in there and talk about the game for something other than a stupid Nintendo console. So let's start playing Resident Evil 4. Damn it. And this is such a logo. 4 Resident Evil follows Leon Kennedy, who first appeared in Resident Evil 2. Originally a police officer, now a full-blown government agent, his mission is to save the president's daughter, Ashley. But watch out, Leon, there's a cult in the mix. Yeah, she was kidnapped by some cult. They inject people with this garbage virus that turns people into murderous cult members. That's pretty much it. I mean, Leon and Ashley get the juice too. They're kidnapped and injected with the virus, but it has to simmer a bit in their bodies before they turn into that. The main goal here is to return home with Ashley while also removing the cult bugs from themselves, but that's not gonna be so simple with a 14-hour long video game, now is it? I like RE4's plot, it's fun and keeps things moving. It's easily understandable, and while new characters and plot elements are thrown in there consistently, it never felt like too much and remained entertaining. It strikes a good balance between fucking ridiculous and oddly grounded. Who knew cult plots could be so fun? The main villain is Lord Sadler. He controls the minds of everybody here, but I will always consider Ramon Salazar to be my favorite. I want a plush of this guy. Graphically, this game holds up tremendously. It looks better than most people I see on the street. Animations are great now, but for a GameCube game, oh my god. Textures and the overall environments definitely aged the poorest, but by and large, this still looks good. And the voice acting is pretty decent as well. I think. The lines can be so stupid sometimes that I don't know if it's the writing or the voice actor's delivery that was bad, but who cares, I'm having a good time over here. Now, the general gameplay of Resident Evil 4 goes like this. Progress, kill horde of enemies, progress, kill horde of enemies, kill horde of enemies, light puzzle solving, find object to progress, boss fight, progress, kill horde of enemies. Now you see, that sounds repetitive when I put it like that, but really any game would describe that way. I hate Mario because all you do is jump. Blasting hordes of enemies is incredibly fun, mainly because, dare I say, Resident Evil 4 is one of the most well-designed and balanced games I've ever played. It has this giant named El Gigante, that's right, f*** you Max Payne 3. None of the environments are easy to get lost in. Everything is straightforward and understandable without being boring. It's fun to dig around these places, breaking open crates to find hidden goodies, checking out notes left or little details. On normal difficulty, they give you just the right amount of ammo, just the right amount of checkpoints, just the right amount of everything to make the game work so damn well on the first playthrough. Not too hard, not too easy. You can still get stuff done with the amount of ammo they give you, but it's not enough to where you can just shoot wildly without a care in the world. However, there were some parts where the amount of ammo I had leading up to that point made things stupid tight. Like this boss fight with the 2 El Gigantes. Like, yeah, you dump one of them in the lava, but the other one, Jesus, man. I barely had enough ammo to beat him, and then immediately afterwards when I had no ammo left, I had to go through this area with like 80-something bug guys. Thanks. Now, the gameplay balance is just right, but one thing that does make RE4 more difficult is the control. Yes, the controls are a little clunky and weird here, but I don't think this is a negative with the game, for a few reasons. First, let me get this out of the way. Resident Evil 4 isn't horror, it's horror. This isn't a scary game, it's scary themed. There were only like 3 times where the game either startled me or gave me some chills based on like the visuals or sound design. Like when I broke open a crate and a snake attacked me. I mean, I wasn't expecting that made me flinch. There was this one time near the beginning where an enemy was right around the corner, that kind of made me jump. But then there were the sound effects from the more powerful enemies in the game. You have your standard villagers or henchmen that are just kind of whatever. But then you have the Chainsaw Man, or this guy, the Regenerator. When you hear the chainsaw in the distance or the Regenerator's harsh breathing, but you don't know where they are, that's when this game does horror the best. You feel the sense of dread like, oh man, they're coming. But then the rest of the game is this. So yeah, this game isn't scary, but it creates a sense of tension. The controls are weird by today's standards. You can't move while aiming. You still have tank controls and can only move forward or backwards and swerve left and right. These definitely aren't ideal, but they feel deliberately crafted this way. The controls don't feel dated or like a product of its time because the rest of the game works so well around them. They make each and every enemy counter an adrenaline rush. Things just aren't completely in your favor. Ammo is definitely there, but not ridiculously abundant. Your controls make it so you can't run and gun and just mow down enemies. You could use the shotgun and obliterate your foes, but then you might not have enough shotgun ammo when you really need it in the future. They make a simple enemy more of a threat this way, and with a more action-focused gameplay, this helps retain some of the horror of Resident Evil in a weird way. The controls may feel dated and clunky, but give them some time and it's easy to realize this game wouldn't work nearly as well with more modern and smoother controls. I feel like they would break the game and it wouldn't be nearly as fun or balanced. The controls are definitely one thing I see people dock this game for with the recent re-releases of it. I don't think anybody's wrong for thinking the controls are clunky and haven't aged well. I just personally believe they work in the context of the game. So if the controls aren't bad, what didn't I like about this game? This game has some QuickTime events. Kinda whatever. Like, who cares if you fail them? What, you have to watch 10 seconds of a cutscene all over again? No! I don't really have too big of an issue with them here, mainly because I feel QuickTime events are at their worst when they're just replacing what would be fun portions of the game, if you could actually play them. RE4 just kind of uses them randomly to keep you on your toes. It mainly kind of felt like they had some cutscenes, and they made you press some buttons during them. Not great, but not really an issue to be honest. They don't detract anything at all. If I had anything else to complain about, I will say by the last 2 hours of the game, I was kind of saying, alright, let's wrap this up. Because this game just keeps on going, man. I was just ready for it to end an hour or two before it actually ended. Like, it could have ended plot-wise at like 4 spots in the story, but there's always another villain to deal with, and Ashley keeps on getting kidnapped. Oh yeah, Ashley. Ashley. There were only a handful of instances where she was actually helpful to Leon. Most of the game she's been kidnapped and you're alone, also known as my favorite moments of the game. But when she's with you, my god, now you have to worry about her health bar and her being in the line of fire, damn it! But other than those things, which weren't really major problems, they were just kind of little bits that kind of annoyed me. This is probably one of the best games I've ever played. Like, it was even fun for me to organize my inventory. Why? It's just stupid fun to traverse these environments and kill all these enemies. They knew the perfect time to introduce new bad guys, new weapons, new puzzles. Nothing is ever boring here. It's a blast from start to end, except when I was fighting this thing. It was called It, and Jesus, I died. This was probably why I was ready for this game to end near the finale. Apparently, this game has strong language and violence. Language? I mean, there's some words you might see on CBS from time to time, but nothing you couldn't say in a church parking lot. Violence? Yeah, this left an impression on me. RE4 is available on so many different platforms, but I of course played the Wii edition. This controlled like a dream, which is weird for me to say since I was never a huge fan of Wii controls with shooters. It's probably because this is in third person and just the way this game works, it's just tailor-made for the Wii Remote's pointer. The unconventional controls were way easier for me to get used to since I was controlling them with an unconventional controller. Well, let's see how the PS4 version stacks up. Jesus, no thank you. Yeah, it's really hard for me to play this after playing Wii edition. I just can't do this game with a standard controller, man. I need the Wii Remote, or at the very least gyro aiming. At least everything is much clearer. This game cleans up very well. But it looks like they basically took the original game and just kind of put it in a higher resolution. A lot of these textures weren't made to be seen in 1080p, so in my opinion, the HD version looks clear, but the Wii version oddly feels less dated. With the PS4, you can see all the garbage textures. The Wii? Yeah, this version's over 10 years old and in 480p. It's low res, but it's the resolution RE4 was meant to be played in. For good measure, let's check out the original GameCube release, coming on 2 whole discs. Yeah, this is pretty much the controls of the PS4 version with the graphics of the Wii version. Actually, this is a lot smoother. Wii edition looks a lot more pixelated. Weirdly enough, I found the controls more manageable here than on the PS4. I guess my brain doesn't like playing this game with a modern controller. It just works best for me with an older one. I don't have the PS2 release, but I heard it's basically the GameCube one, but not as good graphically, with some bonus content thrown in there, which is also available in all the releases afterwards. You could also use a chainsaw controller to play this game. If you want to do that, be my fucking guest. So, Resi 4 has been gutted from my backlog. I'm so happy I finally bit the bullet and played this one, because it turned out to be honestly one of the best games I've ever played. And next time I'm gonna beat a game from my backlog, I have no excuses to finally play Max Payne 3, so next time I'll be checking out Adventures of Dino Ricky on the NES. Finally, oh my god, now that's one thing I can finally cross off of my bucket list, finally playing Resident Evil 4. Now I can move on to my next one, holding a Sega Saturn. I can die now.